Welcome to the fourth session in OE 101. If you are joining us for the first time today, we're glad to have you here. Today, we'll be diving into frequently asked questions that have come up during this series. If you've joined us for any of the other sessions or all of the four sessions, thank you for coming back. I'm Christina Riemann-Murphy. I'm a visiting program officer for Open Education Leadership at Spark, and I'm an Open Education librarian at Penn State. And I'll be introducing all of our speakers today shortly. So on behalf of Spark, I want to welcome you for joining us and set the context. Again, I'm sorry, this is maybe the fourth time you've heard this, but back in 2024, Spark introduced Open Access 101, which is driven by Will Cross, who's here with us today, Maria Bond, and Josh Bullock. And we're thrilled that actually OA 101 has continued on in updated iterations and will continue on. And we're thrilled to be inspired by them to do Open Education 101 and from the turnout we've gotten. As you can see, we're in a webinar format, so feel free to use the chat as you've already done to introduce yourselves, but also share resources, interact with other attendees. While we'll be answering these questions today, we would love this to be a really active chat today and hear how you think about these questions, pose us some new questions, and just share with us your ideas around them. We're going to try to get through all the questions that we have set. If we have any extra time, we'll answer any other questions that come up. You can also use the Q&A feature if you want to pose some additional ones. And again, feel free to share any links and resources. Just a note that all participants who registered will receive a copy of the slide deck with the links when we send out the recording. And that will also be posted to Spark's Open Education 101 page as well. So you are welcome to take notes and screenshot, which I somehow cannot seem to ever stop myself from doing, even when I know things are going to be shared. I just keep screenshotting. But you do not need to know that we'll be sharing everything with you as well. And there is the link to the Spark Open Education 101 series. So, so far in this series, this is 4 parts. We've gone over Open Education Foundations, Open Education in Practice, Open Education in the Current Moment, and that brings us here today to those frequently asked questions. I won't review everything, but this is what we've done in these sessions. If you haven't joined us before, you can certainly go to our Spark webpage and look at the recordings and the slides. They're all licensed openly, of course, so also feel free to use this content in your own context and modify it as needed. Today we have with us, there's 5 of us here today that will be talking. We have Nicole Allen, the Director of Open Education at Spark, Will Cross, the Director of the Open Knowledge Center and the Head of Information Policy at NC State University Libraries, Brad Griffith, the Senior Director of Academic Pathways and Innovation at the Colorado Department of Higher Education, Gabby Hernandez, the Open Education Community Manager at Spark. So thank you all for being with us here today. We're really looking forward to this conversation and discussion. And just one sort of reminder, some assumptions, while all of us come from 5 different locations, 5 different backgrounds and contexts, have been at multiple institutions and organizations. We always know we have a limited we're all limited by where we come from, right? We've really, though, tried to approach this with a high-level overview of open education for librarians, instructional designers, faculty, administrators, and educators more broadly. Our goal is literacy and awareness, not fluency. We hope today that if you encounter any of the questions that that we're posing today or that you've posed to us, that you will have some good answers for how to address them in your own contexts. Our backgrounds influence us, but we really try to look at it broadly. Some of the things we say today or that we've talked about in this series are debated and contested, right? We are all experts and have various expertise, but not the sole arbiters of the answers to these questions. And all of us believe that open education is a good thing, but that it must be critiqued. So I will get us started with our common questions and answers. And our first one that came up a lot, actually. Where do I find OER and how do I review it for quality? So in session 1, very briefly, in session 2 as well, we kind of talked about different places to find OER. So if you want sort of a longer answer to those, you are welcome to go back and look at those. But there are many places to find OER, right? Which can make it both wonderful and complex. There are repositories, there are referatories, there are research guides or LibGuides. There are individual OER technical application sites like Pressbooks or LibreText for courseware that are various places that you can go to. Across all the disciplines, there's a lot of different formats, a lot of different means of producing OER and sharing OER. So I'm going to put just a few in the chat of some links that we've shared out previously. The first, well, that's shared about various space. The first is to the Open Textbook Library, which has nearly 1,700 textbooks, and that comes from the Open Education Network. Great place to start. OpenStax is also listed here, which is at a Rice University, which is widely adopted OER, that also has courseware and open homework system integration. LibreText as well, which is wonderful OER platform where you can get complete courses. You can actually see what universities are using various resources. There's also ways you can pull individual modules and chapters, and you can create that as well. Pressbooks is a digital publisher of open content, and the directory is a wonderful place to find existing OER as well. And finally, OER Commons, if we have any folks that may also be looking for K through 12, OER Commons is a great way to sort by education level, higher ed, all the way through K through 12, by standards, and just to find a ton of things. So this is not an exhaustive list. We definitely recommend sort of starting broad, seeing what's out there, and then narrowing down. I always recommend, so I'm an open education librarian. If I'm sort of stuck on finding something for a faculty, I reach out to the subject specialists at my university to get their expertise as well. So talk to maybe librarians if that's appropriate. Talk to other faculty if you're a faculty here in your department that may already be using open education to see what they're using. So that's another sort of great tactic to see what folks are using. The second question, how do I review it for quality? There's going to be a different answer to that depending on your position, right? So if you are a faculty member, look at it for quality the same way you would look at any other commercial resource quality, right? Does it fit your learning outcomes? Number one, right? Is it what you're looking for? Does it cover what you need it to cover? Does it have the breadth and depth of what you need? So I always say just approach it as anything else, right? As a librarian from my position, I tend not to evaluate because I'm not using the resource for quality. When I recommend it to faculty, I share it with them. I encourage them to evaluate it just like they would any other resource. But I don't sort of take on that burden, right? I feel like that is the faculty's job with their content expertise to do that. Yes, Jody, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to share two resources. One is actually, they're both from the Open Education Network, right? So the Open Education Network has a great, very succinct guideline for what to look for when you're reviewing an item, when you're reviewing an OER. So highly recommend that. And the Open Textbook Library actually has reviews built right in. And those reviews come from other faculty that are in the same discipline as the textbook that is being reviewed. So I absolutely use that. It has a nice star system, right? If you're obviously with Amazon, it looks very familiar to that, but also faculty then explain why they're giving it the review they do. So absolutely. Thank you, Jody, for sharing that. Definitely recommend that. So that's sort of, we'll get that sort of basic question out of the way. So maybe a more challenging question. And Gabby, I'm going to throw this one to you. So what are the most effective strategies for engaging faculty and administrators who may be skeptical about OER?
Yeah, sure. I'm definitely happy to begin the conversation on this, and I have a couple of strategies. But before I go into that, I do want to share another resource. Recently, the Open Education Association Development Project created an Open Education Getting Started guide. And in this guide, it has a couple areas of different topics, and one of them is finding OER. And so there's some links in there, as well as some verbiage and wording that could help you get started, or just having that resource when you're thinking about finding OER. And so if I'm thinking about, I too was an open education librarian, and I ran a program. I was one of the lucky ones to be able to have the title Open Education Librarian. So that was the full-time role that I participated in. And so some of the things that I found really useful and effective when engaging faculty were, one of the things I did was just connecting with places on campus where faculty are used to getting their professional development. If your library does not run like a robust professional development program, and that's not where faculty connect of how they learn about different things, then maybe connect to those places. If you have like a teaching and learning center or education excellence, there's many different titles for it, but take a look. If you are a librarian, take a look at your campus and see where those professional development opportunities are, and see if you can have conversations there and connect there, because sometimes faculty might be more receptive to a topic coming from the place that they're used to finding their professional development and talking about engaged teaching practices. And with that, you can also connect open education practices with innovating teaching practices. Sometimes faculty are hesitant because of the large amount of work they have on their plate. So if you can make that connection that by engaging in open educational practices, you're actually engaging in all of these innovative teaching practices. It's not adding to the list of teaching practices. It's actually by engaging in this, you are already doing these teaching practices. And so that's another conversation that you can have with faculty so it doesn't feel like, I've already got to do all of these innovative teaching practices, and now you're telling me to do another thing on top of all of that. So showcasing how all of these things are connected could be really effective with engaging faculty who might be hesitant. Another thing, if you are, again, this is talking from like a librarian perspective, if you're maybe running a program, being really respectful and understanding that a lot of the time faculty are coming to this with the 100 other things that they're trying to do. A lot of the time it was engaged faculty who really wanted to go that extra mile for their students, but they're also going the extra mile in a lot of different other areas. So I thought, what could I do? Could I do an OER search for them and give them a starting point and say, this is what I think would be good. What are areas that are missing? Am I on the right track or the wrong track? So what could I take off of their plate so it didn't feel like another time commitment where they couldn't engage or time was the reason they weren't engaging? Or just emails that are very simple and to the point. If you have that built relationship where it's like directly like, this is for high enrollment classes like yours, here's the link directly to the one resource. If you're interested or would like to learn more, reach out to me. So thinking about what can you take off of their plate in order to help them engage if you have the capacity to do so. Also, like Christina was talking about a little bit earlier, if you are a librarian or coming from a librarian perspective, I never pressured faculty, right? I never said, this is the best thing you should do. I would always say, try it out, see how it feels. Or as the librarian, I really love collecting resources and I'm happy to provide you a lot. But at the end of the day, you're the content expert. You're the one in the classroom. You're the one who can fully say, does this fit my students' need or not? Also thinking about it as it doesn't have to be all or nothing. I would always say, come at it, a module at a time. What is the one module that just never quite hits for your students with the materials that you have? Try OER out for that one. Have your students be a part of the process, have them reflect on it. What do they feel? So with faculty who are skeptical about maybe its relevance or how good it would be or its quality, I would always leave it up to them and always tell them to engage their students and let their students help evaluate if it was helpful or not. And then from there, they can build module at a time if they really liked it. Or I also had some faculty try it for a summer session, right? Because they felt like it was shorter, it was less, bandwidth for them to try it in that smaller subset of students. If you're thinking about this from an administrator point of view, or you're talking to administrators, one thing that you could do is think about what are the current institutional initiatives that your institution is already running. Do they have an overall affordability initiative? Do they have food pantries? Do they have things that are trying to reduce cost barriers and align open education, OER, open education practices with those things that are already happening, as well as taking a look through like the institution's mission and values, strategic plan, and what are the words that are used in those things, and use that same wording when speaking to administrators that this is already a priority for the institution, and open education can help us reach those goals, not we're adding another initiative on top of everything else we're doing. And then the last thing with administrators that I have to say is just collecting data on your program. And that could be numbers, but it could also be things like student stories, faculty testimonials. So they're hearing it from the people who are actually engaging in the work, to help them, if they're hesitant or have barriers, or maybe they just don't really quite understand, having students talk about what's going on, how this is affecting them. And I have seen that administrators listen to that quite a bit more than they may listen to like a librarian or someone else who's running the program. So those are some ideas. I'm happy to open it to anybody else who has some ideas as well.
We did have an idea in the chat. Kelly said to just kind of pre-work, look at the course outline of record to see how much matches across OER that you found. So Kelly, that's a great idea, right? Go in sort of knowing maybe if something does align really well. Thank you for that, Kelly.
Absolutely. And I would always ask for a syllabus, or if I could find the syllabus online, it's just anything that I could do to say, these are the things I think, but at the end of the day, what do you think? Where are some areas, or can you help me guide my search? I would ask, like, are there some key terms or areas that are missing from this list? I'm happy to see if there's anything out there. And then also sometimes just telling faculty to continue engaging, because the resource may not be there one semester, and then the next semester there's so much new OER that's being populated all the time. So just staying engaged in the movement, and they may find something that really works, 1 year later when they're teaching the same course.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabby. So we're going to stick with thinking about libraries and librarians. The question actually came up a lot, and really appreciate that folks shared this. So librarians play a key role in OER adoption generally across the open education field, but how can we better integrate them into OER creation and pedagogy if they don't formally teach? And Will, I know you just took a sip, but I'm going to actually toss that first part to you, if you don't mind sharing
Yeah,
that.
happy to. So I'm excited to hear what other people say as well, but I wanna offer a friendly amendment to that question and acknowledge that librarians often do teach in a lot of different ways. We do a lot of work as instructors in one-off sessions and workshops, and we very often parachute into more formal structured courses to talk about information literacy or using library resources, that sort of thing. And I offer that amendment because I think it's really important that we claim that role and that expertise, because sometimes you can be dismissed if you don't claim that role. And that gives us an authentic voice and an authentic understanding of that work as well. So whether you're jumping into one-off sessions, I teach a full semester-long course, and I bet a lot of other folks do as well. I just wanted to offer gently but full-heartedly that that's a role and an expertise that we have, and you should be loud and proud about bringing to that conversation as well. But I'm super interested to hear what Christina and Gabby and other folks have to say about this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, I found like the Creative Commons certificate, I found really useful because it encouraged you to throw a license on the things you were creating. And I had not previously thought, even though I was very involved in open education, of putting a license on my slide deck that I did in my one-shots, right? I just hadn't thought to do that. And so even thinking about it, right, from this simple idea, I have a tune in my head, the Beyonce, if you like it, then you should have put a ring on it. If you share it, then you should put a CC license on it. It was what I always think. If you create it, put a license on it, right? So started to make that a simple practice that I could do to think about how I can be, creating my own OER and sharing it, right? I didn't necessarily add it to OER Commons, but I made sure that I had a license on it. And that also opens up a conversation with any students and faculty that you're working on it as well. So, Gabby, how about if I take this next question to you? Or would you like to say
Sure.
something about OER adoption? Go ahead.
Yeah, so the one thing I would say too is I definitely agree with Will, and piggybacking off of that is some librarians come with education background and they bring that teaching experience with them as they have shifted into this new role. But just being open, if that's something that you're confident in, awesome. But if it's something you're not confident in, it's okay. And just being open communication pathways, saying this is what I'm comfortable when, this is what I can do. And as a librarian, we can find the resources that talk about OER creation and provide that resource support, or finding examples of open pedagogy processes and just the things that are out there openly licensed. You can be the curator of that knowledge and information and pass it that way. So there's always different roles that you can play, but just understanding where your strengths are, and then having that, let the people know that this is where I feel like I can really help you in this project, and there's pathways for connection there. Would you like me to go ahead and go to the second
Go ahead,
question?
Gabby. Yeah. What are some
Okay.
successful models of collaboration between librarians and faculty? Yeah.
And I'll start with an idea. One successful model that I've seen across a lot of institutions is creating your campus champions. And that can be something really large, or it could also be something really small, where it's just, who are the people that keep coming to your webinars, and start building relationships with them. And then those people then become your champions and the one who are able to talk faculty to faculty. Just a personal experience, I had a faculty who was one of my champions. And instead of telling the other person that he was talking to how amazing OER was, he would come to me first, be like, this faculty member is using this resource. Do you have something? So he was actually the one who was asking me to do the research. And then he would go take that and speak faculty to faculty about how amazing it was. So a lot of the times when you start building those champions and those relationships, they start doing their work for you in a very natural way. So that's one way that I have found the collaboration between librarians and faculty to promote OER, especially in a discipline-specific way.
Thanks, Gabby. Will or Brad, do you have anything you want to add there?
I'll just say I have seen some really successful partnerships between librarians and instructional designers within divisions of online learning. And whenever OER can be incorporated into any of those processes where faculty are having direct conversations about their courses, learning outcomes, curriculum, it's the time to shine with OER. So don't hesitate to even go to those units on campus and ask, how can we begin educating faculty and work with you, to bring them to the table for OER, because they do need you as well. Instructional designers, course designers are not experts in everything. They absolutely can rely upon that partnership with librarians and the time that you all can really save faculty in particular through that curation process.
That is great, Brad. Thank you for pointing out. Yes, really important people to connect with. Instructional designers and course designers. Yeah. Okay. So next we had a lot of questions about advocacy and strategy. So one that surfaced a couple times is, what are some examples of compelling arguments or evidence-based strategies to counter the narrative pushed by commercial publishers about the necessity of their platforms for academic success? And Will, I'm going to throw that one to you.
Yeah, I'll start off, but I want to acknowledge that there's a ton of expertise in this area across the panel and in the chat as well. So I hope I'm not the only voice talking about this issue. But I'll offer 3 areas that I've seen be fairly productive in the past. And the first one is that although the conversations about savings have gotten more complicated in light of these automatic billing models that throw up these sort of eye-popping, oh, we're going to save all this money, cost is still a thing. Free is better than cheap every day of the week, especially with the way that student loans can take, it was $1, but after student loans and interest, it's $10 or that sort of thing, right? So being able to say this isn't just less expensive, this is free to use, can be really, really valuable. Particularly because we have really compelling evidence about what happens with lock-in and rising prices over time. That we've all had the experience in library land with journals, right? The field that I work in, scholarly communication, came from the fact that we signed up for automatic billing, basically models for journals, and then we got locked in and the prices exploded, and here we are now. And everybody, if you have Hulu or Disney Plus, you just saw your prices go up again this week, even while they were going through some major public relations issues as well. So I think everybody can immediately understand, yeah, it looks cheap today, but 1, free is better than cheap, and 2, cheap today might not be cheap tomorrow or next week or next year as well. So I really value continuing to own that cost conversation. Particularly when we recognize that the notion of savings can be a little bit manufactured by some publishers, since they set the baseline price of the resource. It's that old thing where you double the price and then you say it's half off and you're saving all this money. Well, yeah, we're savings from this arbitrary dollar amount that you invented. So again, hard to argue with $0, and we're all viscerally familiar with the complications of what looks like a good deal on the surface. So that cost piece is one I don't want to get rid of, even though I recognize it's complicated. The second sort of advocacy piece I want to talk about is academic freedom, which has been a North Star for open education for as long as I've been part of it as well. one of the hallmarks of open education is that the experts get to choose their own resources. But as my campus has adopted an automatic billing model, they're suddenly finding themselves going, hey, this isn't the textbook I wanted to use or the resource I wanted to use isn't included in that package. Do I have to switch to the university approved one, which feels weird? Do I have to ask my students to pay for the all-in model and then get a textbook on the side? Those tensions around academic freedom, I think, are real live for faculty members and are very much on the table when you talk about adopting any sort of one-size-fits-all lock-in sort of platform. That comes along with a set of sort of black box considerations around a lot of the bells and whistles that are offered, right? Our amazing digital service will tell you when students are struggling. Well, how does it do that? What data does it use? Oh, that's proprietary and you can't see that, but just trust us. We're going to tell you who your struggling students are, right? That there's an academic freedom piece to that. There's a sort of a pedagogy piece to that as well. I've seen a really visceral version of this with faculty who are using Turnitin to evaluate student works as a way to check on AI usage. A lot of students are using Grammarly because English is not their first language, and they're using that to sort of help. Grammarly recently added AI into the mix, and students didn't always know that. So a bunch of students were getting flagged for like, oh, you're cheating, you're using AI. And like, they were just using a tool that's been approved of by the institution. That sort of black box thing led to a lot of bad feelings and misunderstanding among faculty and students, just because they didn't own their pedagogy. They were sort of licensing it out to some third-party solution in different ways. For my money, there is no substitute for the 5R pedagogy, both in the individual classroom and across the discipline in terms of building up a set of materials. So cost, academic freedom. And then the third thing that I'll say is that we are in a moment of deep and often well-founded skepticism about sort of technological solutionism, about you don't really need a human to make these decisions about teaching. We'll just pay a licensing fee to this big for-profit corporation and they'll handle that for us. If you've ever seen me speak, I have this picture of what they call the professor in the box, which is like, oh yeah, now your professor is just a product you can buy. That never works out well. But when you talk about data privacy, when you talk about the extractive nature of some of these tools and educator agency, I'll use the word enshittification, which has gone around a lot as well, right? This sense that at this moment, as much as any time, oh, don't worry, those friendly people in technology will solve this for us is something people are looking at more closely. So just being able to say OER is about centering you as a human being, your students as human beings, and bringing you together to build the things that are right for you has been really, really effective in my context. And I can imagine it might be successful in other contexts as well. So those three, cost, academic freedom, and the sort of the techlash thing that's going right now are three that I'll throw on the table to start us off. But Brad, Christina, you all, I bet, have wonderful things as well to say, and I'd be interested to hear those.
I'll just add that I run a adoption program, like a grant program, and we survey the students at the end of the semester and ask them, basically how did it work for them? Right. Like, and we, of course, expected, our hypothesis was that students would love that it was free. And they did, right? Like, that wasn't a hard hypothesis to make. But we were actually fairly shocked that what came up nearly almost even to being free was how it was easy to access. That it didn't require a code, that it didn't require a login, that you didn't have to create an account, right? That you could just easily, with a link, access or embed it into your course, right? Penn State uses Canvas, right? Faculty have that freedom to do that, right? They're not locked into proprietary platforms that are pushing out somewhere. And so that sort of surprised us. But it makes sense, of course, when you think about right now our own user experience on the internet. It's like, blah, right? Like, I have to create a login for everything, right? So it shouldn't have surprised us. But I think that was something that was really just good to think about, right? Like the ease of access that open education and OER can provide is really great in a time when the internet is becoming more complex, and you used a great term, Will, right? Like more complicated to use, requiring more information from us. Generally, OER does not require that. And so that is also a nice, and that's an easy one also to share with faculty, right? Because faculty, we're all having the same experience on the internet. So ease of access and persistence of access, right? The idea that you can retain that, for me, I think under no illusion that students want to have every textbook they've ever had, but I have my own experience with my child who didn't get the required grade, had to take the course again, and is now resubscribing at $170 to the same thing that they subscribed to the first semester, and now has to pay for it again. Was really frustrating and surprising for him as a student. So yeah, those are some, I think, other arguments, right? Access and persistence of access that I would add to that.
I would
Matt, I
just
see you're
add that I
unmuted. Go ahead.
think
Yeah.
commercial publishers do not have the ability to help us as much to meet learners, industry partners, all of these other individuals that need to participate in the space of learning where they are. It feels very often like it's an out of the box approach, as Will mentioned, a one size fits all approach. And that is just not acceptable, I think, in this climate. And I'm going to touch on some of these things when we get to a later slide, but that would be what my answer is here.
Thanks, Brad.
Love those. Thanks
Okay.
for sharing.
Yeah, appreciate it. Okay, well, we actually have requests for entire sessions on AI, which, Will, you could probably tell us what upcoming session you're doing about AI, but we'll attempt to answer at least, sort of the big over question that came up the most. So how do we navigate the ethical challenges of using AI to generate or remix OER, especially in relationship to authorship, citation, credit, sustainability? So, Will, over to you for this one to start us off.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, I'm happy to start off, but I'm really excited to hear what other folks say as well, because this is the big one. As you say, this gets to the heart of some of our core assumptions in open education. A lot of the people who have come to open education came because of things they were hoping to see happen that AI either helps address or threatens in some way. So this is at some level the existential thing we're all wrestling with. So I love this opportunity to talk here. And this one especially, I hope folks will jump into the chat and share their experiences as well. But I want to say something that's probably pretty obvious, which is that this is a place to lead with our values first and foremost, right? And in particular, I want to look at the values of transparency and agency as two of the main things we think about in this space. I also want to recognize that the people who are excited about artificial intelligence often see it as an opportunity to address some of our steepest challenges, right? Ancillaries in our textbooks, some of the laborious creation around alt text in our images, right? Our ability to make highly competitive, top of the line versions of things and to include people who need more support than the imagined non-existent average student, right? That's the thing that has people excited about AI. So if you are an AI skeptic, I invite you to look at those as core ways to meet open education's mission. But to the specific question about how do we navigate this, everybody I have talked to, and I've talked to hundreds of people in the open education community, starts with transparency. They want to know when you're using it and how you're using it. And that's a don't try to fool me piece. And that's also a share the good stuff. I want to know how to use this well. And that idea of making something that doesn't just benefit me, but benefits the community as a whole, that's what open education is all about, right? So transparency about, I used AI in this way, and I'm not feeling sneaky or ashamed of it. I'm proud of it, and I hope everybody else does it too. That goes hand in glove with the open licenses that we use. So that idea around transparency is really significant. The Creative Commons has released this set of preference signals that we mentioned a couple weeks ago. That's a really sort of indicative tool about our space in the larger AI conversation, because they are not binding, right? Those preference signals are not a way to solve the larger, Google is going to take my stuff and use it in a way I don't like piece, but it is a way to speak specifically to the people within our community and say, Brad, I'm working with you. Let me tell you what I'm hoping this will look like. And then for Brad to say, Will, I respect what you're interested in, and I'm going to respond to that in a way. So those tools that really center transparency about what you're doing and then expression about what you hope happens with it, I think is a really, really important place to start in that conversation. Along with that, I want to get on my soapbox a little bit about agency in open education as well, because I think that's sort of the other of the 2 feet walking in open education. And this is the idea of supporting different approaches and recognizing that the right strategy for me might not be the right strategy for you, Christina, or for somebody else. And so coming to open education and saying, this is the way this new tool that we're all trying to figure out seems to fit for me. you're using it in a different way, and that's totally okay. Neither of us is a bad open educator. Neither of us is like selling out the movement or whatever, right? We talked about, the folks at Kennesaw State are actively, aggressively using AI in really cool ways. The folks at Open Oregon said, we're taking a pause. It's not the right tool for this. There's not a hero and a villain in that conversation. There are two organizations saying, here's a new thing. How does that fit into the mix? So agency at the sort of policy and decision-making level is really, really important, but agency for individual educators and individual students as well, right? That different faculty members are going to use this in different ways. And open education benefits when we create the space for educators to be playful and experimental and do the new things that open pedagogy in particular invites people to do. That's often the easy one. The one that can feel more challenging to people is that different students need that space as well, that individual students in a class, I would argue, need the ability to say, AI is not something I'm comfortable with. I don't like it, feels extractive and it's harmful. Please don't make me use that. And then the student right beside them might say, I find AI absolutely invaluable. English is not my first language. This is not a perfect representation of my thoughts, but it's a tool that helps me share what I think and what I'm trying to say more effectively. And that I think our best version of navigating those challenges gives a lot of space as we all figure this thing out together to say, okay, let me try this. That went great. I hope everybody uses this. Oh, I'm going to try this. Oh, that blew up in my face. I'm going to sort of, explain why that didn't work so well and let the community go forward so that we as a community can work together to find the good stuff and discard the not so good stuff. So that's my little soapbox about transparency and about agency. But Brad, Christina, you all have been doing stuff with AI too. So I'm really interested to hear what you all think. And folks in the chat, please continue to share how you're thinking about these issues, because it's something we're all figuring out together.
Well,
Thanks,
I'll
Mary.
just
Mary
say,
just posted something. Yeah.
go ahead,
Go
Christina,
ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead, Brad, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think this is such an individual perspective question right now. And even among the staff that I supervise at the Department of Higher Ed in Colorado, concerns are raised about even the climatological impact of using AI tools. And there's really not a one size fits all approach to this right now. And it's such an evolving conversation that I feel like every time I try to box in myself on a perspective or an opinion about this, it ends up getting challenged and disrupted at some point. So I don't have any firm answers yet. This is just something that I continue to follow. And I also, again, try to maintain that growth mindset in myself while also realizing that this does have room for toxicity, I think, in the world and potentially in education as well, that we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, and I think personally, I've just found it. My own resistance, right, comes from concerns around sustainability, but also anything that's constantly being told to you that you must use this, you have to use this, you need to do this to survive, makes me feel a little like, It's a question always of who's benefiting from my use of this, right? Is a really important question that probably many of us are asking, right? And I just continuing honestly to read about it and educate myself, right? As much as trying out the things are good, but reading critical perspectives on all sides, right? From other educators, from other librarians, I think is really helpful. Thank you, Mary and Leela, for putting those links in the chat. Some great resources, I think, for us to check and share. So appreciate that. Okay, now into another really tricky topic. And Brad, I'm going to shoot this one to you. So in open education, labor funding and sustainability, right? If OER is free to use, still costs money, right? There's labor involved, there's time, there's platforms. So who should be responsible for funding its creation, maintenance, and dissemination? And what sustainable models exist to support this work long term?
This is a really good question, and I'm privileged to have the opportunity to be able to provide some, I think, interesting perspective on it. So I work now for the Colorado Department of Higher Education, but previously in my role with the Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Education, I managed their statewide OER initiative. And in my 5-year tenure in that job, we started with no funding ultimately for OER initiatives at the state level. There was a grassroots community, largely of librarians and instructional designers, who, again, are some of the best partners that you can have in this space, that set out to support one another, to develop people that were coming into the space of materials creation or course development. and then to also try to build a case for that kind of support to be sustained at the state level. And so during that time and kind of seeing that model evolve, I had, I think, a really interesting understanding of these different avenues for funding opportunities for OER that can complement multiple systems. And that really is kind of my, word of advice for you all is blend your funding strategies for OER programs as much as you possibly can as that opportunity is presented there. So to directly answer the question, I actually firmly believe that we should be providing government funding to support open education adoption and usage by faculty at our institutions. And that can come in a variety of different forms. As we've seen before from the US Department of Education, the open textbook pilot provided large-scale grant opportunities for states and systems to be able to say, we want to make a movement with open education that supports this particular outcome, and we need to provide funding to support all of the stakeholders, including faculty, as well as those other players in the field in order to make this happen. Of course, those grants are time limited, and states have to find ultimately a way, if they're interested in continuing those outcomes, to be able to pick up the slack there. So Oklahoma, for example, made the case after a couple of years of grassroots activity and outcomes demonstrated by the faculty that had willingly adopted OER, that it was worth investing at the state level in this kind of an initiative to be able to actually encourage sharing among faculty as well. And so, again, if the encouragement is coming from your state to lower the cost of education, ask your state leadership, how are you willing to support these opportunities among my institution, among the individual faculty that are looking to make this change for students? Institutions also have great ability to support OER use among faculty in ways that are also non-monetary. One of the amazing projects that was produced by the Doers organization was a matrix on research, promotion, and tenure and how to incorporate open education strategies into that recognition for faculty. If you don't have the money to set up a grant program, obviously recognizing the work and the scholarly activity that has to occur in order for faculty to make that decision in their class, it's an easy solution for institutions, again, that does not cost anything. And again, there are multiple case studies out there that you can see on the Doers website of seeing how that matrix was adopted and adapted, because again, it is openly licensed by that organization. I mentioned previously, instructional design units can also be a really great resource for supporting and sustaining OER development. I had the privilege of working at a regional university in Oklahoma for 5 years. And in that unit, in the course design process, faculty received stipends for developing online courses. It was paying them for the intellectual property of their class so that the institution could continue using it. And they had a model where if faculty adopted OER within their courses, whenever they were designing it, they would receive an increase in the stipend payout for designing that class because of making that selection. So again, if it's encouraged by the institution and potentially backed through, some of those funding sources that faculty are already able to tap into, can be a potentially pretty easy integration there. Even for other teaching and learning units on campus, you have the opportunity to set up teaching innovation grant programs. Perhaps go and ask those offices, how are you, providing the opportunity for open education to be incorporated into this kind of funding opportunity that's here. Other non-traditional places, particularly for faculty, that I would encourage you all to look at are your disciplinary associations. Industry partners who are also looking to develop talent within your area, which I'll talk about a little bit more on an upcoming slide here, but also nonprofit initiatives. For example, digital humanities. There have historically been a number of different grants offered within that field, depending upon your specific area of research. So I love to, whenever I had the opportunity to consult with faculty members working in Oklahoma, say, you have the opportunity to get funding potentially from this state program, but there's nothing in our agreement with you that says you could not keep on shopping this project around to try to get more funding from every possible source that you can out there. Lastly, I do want to mention this, and I mention this with caution because I do not like us putting the weight of this situation on students for cost of materials, but there have been some successful deployments of small student fees on campuses that support this kind of development and adoption of OER by faculty. And again, I think that begs the ethical question of, is that more costly to charge students, let's say a $5 or $10 per credit hour materials fee, that ends up supporting the sustained free textbook development at the institution? Or again, would you rather be going with automatic textbook billing models, or those other options of just making them go through the traditional bookstores there? So not a one size fits all answer. Again, I realize I've given you here, but I really, again, just ask you to consider, where is that encouragement coming from to use OER? Again, if it's coming from your state, you should be looking to state support. If it's coming from within yourself, you might have to look a little bit harder or be a little bit more creative on being able to find those funding opportunities.
Thanks, Brad. That's actually great because we have folks from so many institutions and contexts here that you gave us a lot of good ideas for how to think about that. Okay, so another question that came up pretty often is about equity, affordability, and campus climate. And I'm actually going to ask Nicole to take our first lead on this one. So in the face of political pushback against DEI initiatives or equity initiatives, how can OER advocates continue to frame open education as a tool for inclusion, equity, and empowerment? And should we?
Yeah, it's a really challenging question at this particular time. It's a reality in the US context right now that efforts to advocate for open education in the context of DEI are now facing political pressure. Of course, that kind of pressure is not new in many places and to many communities, but it is having impacts that are both personal and professional in this work. And at Spark, we have always said that open is an enabling strategy. It's not an end in itself, but it's a set of tools and pathways that can be used to advance a wide variety of ends. That can include making education more equitable, more culturally relevant, supporting students excluded by legacies of injustice, and advancing diversity and equity and inclusion. But open education on its own does not guarantee that. It's just as possible to use open education in the exact opposite way, creating OER that is inaccessible or an exclusionary, and that's going to be no better by virtue of the fact that it's open. So what's important is that open, done well, is an enabling strategy for so much good in education. And that includes equity, but it also includes so many other benefits that we've covered throughout the series. Affordability and student success, accessibility and flexibility, supporting greater academic freedom for faculty and more authentic learning practices, and being able to achieve better outcomes for students. Giving institutions more ownership over the course materials they're using as a form of their digital infrastructure. And I think all of that is to say that it's fully compatible to advance OER as an initiative to support equitable outcomes while also emphasizing many of the other benefits to the audiences that are listening. And in fact, that's how we've always approached advocacy. And advocating for policies like the Open Textbook Pilot or the Affordable College Textbook Act. We've always emphasized different benefits of open education to different lawmakers based on what their priorities are. With more liberal offices, we tend to frame arguments in terms of justice, so fairness and equity and serving those who need it most. And with conservative offices, we tend to frame things more in terms of freedom and transparency, so focus on localization and support for independent learning. And fiscal responsibility. And all of it is true, and all of it is good. And I guess the overarching advice is to understand, what are the local priorities for education in your space, and how can you emphasize those benefits for open education while you continue the work to achieve all of the benefits that serve your students and your community. So I'll leave my contribution to this question there and invite anybody else to jump in.
I'll just say thank you, Nicole, for giving that idea, right? That I know that from my own perspective, I don't have that sort of advocacy background. And I think that's a really important, right? Like ways to think of ourselves as advocates and speaking to different constituents, right? Whether that's at our university or stakeholders, right? Like at our institution, our university, in our state, potentially, right? It's good to know that, right? We do tailor our message to different stakeholders, right? And that open education can still be all of those things. So even if we're framing it differently, thank you.
Yeah, and we've always done that.
Yeah. So appreciate that. Okay, so I'm really going to ask folks to share some ideas in the chat for this next one about community, open education community. So a lot of times still, even though open education has grown huge as a profession, a lot of times there's still the one person at their institution doing this work. And many of you in this call may be that one person, right? So what can we do to foster deeper community building in OER, especially for individuals who are working alone or perhaps disciplinary faculty who may not be recognized maybe for the work they're doing in their classroom, or for those in niche or less commonly represented fields? Gabby, I'll throw this one to you first, but again, please share in the chat and any other folks that want to share their ideas. Love to hear them.
Absolutely. I put in the chat again the open education getting started guide, because we do have a section there about building community with some direct links. There are wonderful, what I have so enjoyed about being a part of the open education community is that it really does feel like a community. There's a lot of listservs, there's a lot of groups, there's a lot of webinars, opportunities, and all of these things that are out there and available. And it does almost feel, like you can reach out. Like, never underestimate the ability to, hear the perspective of somebody, and they say, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Taking that step of, making those connections, having a one-on-one call, and starting to build your circle around you of people maybe who are on, institutions at the same type of institutions that are kind of in the same level of their program, or, different levels. I've started, or when I was working as an open education librarian, we created a super informal OER practitioners group, and we just invited some people who were at institutions around ours and said, here's a drop-in. I know you're kind of doing this work. We're all at different levels. Come as you are, no set agenda. But we just kind of created a little space to be able to talk through some of the things and issues that are kind of across the board at all of our institutions. And that was super helpful to feel like there was a community there. And then it also feels great because if, a faculty member reaches out to you and says, I want to do a collaboration, do you know anybody? Well, maybe you don't, but then you can reach out to that group that you built and start, making those connections. So, sign up for listservs, sign up for newsletters, attend a conference. The Open Education Conference coming up in a couple of weeks is a great opportunity, even if it's a virtual opportunity. And don't feel shy to actually take that leap and create, start building those connections, because many people in this field are very happy to speak, to mentor, to collaborate with lots of different people to move the work forward as a field.
Thanks, Gabby. Brad or Will, you have any ideas?
I'm watching the clock and I want to make sure we have time for the last question, but I just want to plus one everything Gabby said and say that at my institution, community is the #1 thing that we're focused on right now. That sense of being in community is really important. We did during COVID, we did this series of open cafe gatherings online where people could come and just talk and share their ideas. We're very focused on incubators and these communities of practice now. I think that's the #1 thing that I am thinking about and concerned about. And I saw some nods. So I think that's something other folks are thinking about.
Yeah, especially during these times, right? Community feels really important. So both building it for folks that are doing this work and making sure we have it ourselves. Right. Thank you both. Okay, so our last question, and Brad, I'm going to kick this one to you. This came out of the last session where you talked about workforce readiness. So as the demand for workforce ready skills grow, how can OER be leveraged to create accessible, high quality learning pathways that align with industry needs and support lifelong learning?
We're on the way to finding some solid answers for this question with a lot of the work that I've been helping to lead through the Doers organization. And I do want to set the landscape for you all. If you all have not read Workforce in an email from your leadership recently, from your state government or from the national government with relation to higher ed, you've probably been living under a rock. It's just everywhere right now, and it's the top priority. Every single area of an institution, and again, of state government, is being asked, how are you contributing towards this goal that we have to develop people and put them into viable career opportunities? And so Open, I think, has a lot of stones that are unturned that can contribute to this space, starting with co-design and co-creation opportunities with industry partners, specifically with this onslaught of non-degree or short-term credentialing programs. industry partners are coming into the fold of participating in the actual creation of programs in a really new and I think kind of invigorating way. And so think about, for example, if you were able to facilitate conversations with industry partners about open educational resources and what it means to openly license their content, you can begin to have a two-way street of communication with them and get many artifacts from their organization that can then be used as tools by your students and maybe even return to that organization in a better condition than in what they arrived with you in by that collaboration that exists with students there. You can have case studies coming in from them, for example. The other big encouragement that comes with these short-term programs is this emphasis on modularized learning or very, very skill or discrete skill focused learning opportunities. And that again is one of the cases that I think commercial publishers just don't have the opportunity yet to be able to adapt to, is the way that you can pull bits and pieces of content from open education and create this path of learning that is directly matched to the outcomes that an employer needs and what they envision, ultimately for their population there. A big part of this too, I think, with this credential evolution that's occurring is the price point at which these things are having to be offered. Instead of having conversations about tuition and fees being charged for courses, faculty are getting pushed into the space of how can we keep costs for this non-credit program as low as possible in order to maintain market rate opportunities. So again, if you're removing the cost of materials from that equation, both your students and faculty and the industry partner potentially involved already have a leg up on that. And again, from a state investment perspective, because there is a lot of state money that's going into the development of these workforce programs, every less dollar that's required to invest in things like curriculum can be invested in the individuals who are actually trying to complete the program. So lots of good opportunities there, I think, for equity. Obviously, I think there are opportunities for alumni and lifelong learners to be able to tap into this too, and for institutions to really be able to market OER as something that is not just for people that are in their fold right then, but it's something that is going to continue to grow. So think about, again, for somebody who's graduated 5 years ago, point them to your OER repository and say, hey, if you need some skills development, these things are being churned out by current faculty and students at this institution. Go see what you can find in there that's actually relevant for you. But again, it's just that opportunity, I think, for every single discipline area to use open to meet the moment for workforce development. And I think about my humanities folks out there too. They are really under pressure right now to define what their role is within workforce development. I think open is a really great way to bring in some of those new strategies for them. So massive opportunity here. Only other shout out I'll give is that Doers, once again, is going to be leading a session at the Open Education Conference. And I dropped a link in there just in case you're curious to see what's going on there. But later this year, you'll actually be able to see from us a playbook that's going to get produced that will hopefully help faculty navigate these conversations with employer partners to, again, figure out the needs that they have, how they're wanting to develop people, and how that actually translates into materials curation and adaptation through open.
Thank you, Brad. Well, thank you, everyone, for sharing your expertise on these particular questions. I know I have left with some things I need to do, some articles to read on AI, some folks to reach out to at my institution. And Brad, you mentioned a word that I always struggle with: marketing, the things that we do, right? Like how to talk about the great things that we're doing, how to build community around this. So I really want to thank you all for your participation and for sharing your expertise. Love anyone that's attending today. If you have a moment, please put in the chat maybe one thing you learned today, or one next step. I just mentioned 4 next steps that I have. Maybe one next step that you have for your context. We'd love to hear it. And just a reminder as you're doing that we will be sharing out the link to the slides, to the recording. And I'll make sure that we add the links that were shared into the slide deck as well before we send that out to everyone that's registered for the webinar. So we appreciate you being here today, taking the time to be part of this, whether this was your first session or you've been here for all 4. I'll just put up our email addresses. And I don't have Nicole's on there, apologies. But you can follow the guide. It's nicole@sparkopen.org. So feel free to reach out if you'd like to chat any further, have any other suggestions. There will be a survey you'll get when this closes out. If you have any other ideas for sessions that you'd like on this, we'd love to hear your ideas. So thank you all and have a great day.